we'll go a little bit back to basics, and we're just going to recap the automation solution. So Remy, let's see if we can get your form up and running and working through that there, so we can just close out this part. But then today we're going to be moving on to other things. So for this crew, it'll be a bit of a recap, but happy to diverge a little bit and go deeper into certain areas if that would be beneficial for this group here. But what we're going to be doing is talking about custom integration options. So let's say this automation solution doesn't work for you. What does a custom integration look like, and when might you want to use a custom integration? Then we're going to talk about those couple specific use cases, so we can recap what we did for BNS and NRGT as an example, and just review those jobs and understand what was going on there. But then beyond that, just talking again about integration design. If you're deciding to go on this custom route, how do you begin to design an integration solution that takes on that custom route? So that, design role doesn't necessarily have to be someone technical on your team. If you're familiar with data, if you're familiar with how you want your information to flow, then you can still be very much part of this design and this data element mapping process. And then you can either hand off those specifications to someone on your team to implement, or if you have the skills or desires to give it a go yourself, you can also be setting up those open function jobs independently. So we'll go through just a data element mapping exercise, and happy to talk through any other concrete use cases that have just come up in the last couple of weeks. And then at the end, we're just going to be doing a bit more design just around practice, basic configuration, making sure that feel really comfortable with the basic building blocks of the platform and clicking around. So that way, in the coming days, we can really get to job writing and kind of more of these advanced configuration steps to really realize some of these integrations here. So anyone have any questions about the agenda? Anything that you want to be sure we touch on before we dive in? Nope. All right. Well, the automation solution recap. When do we use this? Why is this helpful? Remy, can I pick on you?
Yeah, well, it's useful when you don't really have a database set up. It configures the structure of the database automatically, and it does that for you, I guess.
Absolutely. So even if you don't have a database configured, no worries. In a matter of minutes, you can go from having that Kobo form definition to actually setting up that database, as well as the job to integrate it. So this is very much a metadata sync. So just making sure you have the right infrastructure to capture everything, not necessarily. And then the next step is the data sync, should I say. And then that's where we actually go and we pull data to then run through this infrastructure that we have set up. So Remy, I'm curious, in your work specifically, have you come across a use case where this might be helpful?
So in our case, like under Sharks and Rays, what I know is that you have a lot of country programs that have different languages, and they have a lot of, some of them are different, landing sites are different. So I don't know how how all of these will be combined and can be able to end up in one database. So I guess if there's a way these could be, like, they have different accounts and everything, if they could be if they could all be channeled into one database, and if it could be done automatically, that would be really useful. So I don't know whether that's possible for multiple accounts and multiple sources of the data.
Gotcha. So it sounds like Sharks and Rays, you have all these different data sources that you're trying to get into one place for analysis. And I guess, Remy, do you have a clear vision of what that destination database should look like? Like, have you already kind of thought through, oh, this should be a very specific structure? Or are you kind of, just trying to get the data one place and you'll worry about the structure of the data a little bit later? Have you gotten that far in the process?
No, we haven't gotten that far in the process. So yeah, because okay, it needs a lot of consultation from the different programs because it's not a decision that I can make on my own. So there's a lot of discussions also taking place.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just so you know, like, so with Sharks and Rays, we're providing sort of technical support to Remy and his team, because it's great, you know, it's great they have this understanding. What we might find is actually they spend more of their time working with us on thinking through the analytics and reporting they want. So it may be for the main Sharks and Rays database, we actually provide them the technical support they need to actually map the data and spin up the databases.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, then it sounds like you're at that early stages, at least, Remy, where you know, if you didn't have WCS to kind of this other team to lean back on, you know, you can be at this stage that we're going to talk through today of, do I go this automated route, or do I build my own custom integration that's mapping to a very specific data structure? So we'll get a little bit into that today.
Okay,
cool.
Thanks.
Well, Jesse, I see you've joined as well. Hello, how's it going?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, sorry I joined in a bit late. The going is good. Working from home, that's all.
Awesome. Well, what we talked a lot about last week is just kind of walking through this practice and practicing extracting that COBO form definition. So if you upload a form, you know, taking a look at what that COBO structure might be, if it's just a flat form, if there's nested repeat groups or repeated sets of questions within that form, thinking about how that might go ahead and translate automatically to some sort of very simple database structure, which at the very least captures all your questions in your COBO form in the database, but also starts to model it in a little bit of a way that's slightly more optimized for analysis and integration. And Jesse, since you just joined, we're recapping the automation flow. Do you remember what some of the first steps are for the automation flow? If you have a COBO form and you want to run it through this solution to spin up a database and OpenFN jobs, what are some of the first steps that you might consider?
Okay, I think when you want to transfer the COBO form to OpenFN, you first have to ensure that the unique identifier of the form is what you copying to the OpenFN. There's that ID directory, the four items that you need to fill in, and then one of them you need to pick the unique ID of the form from COBO as to go to the other OpenFN function. And then also you need to know the database where you're going to use, like where you're consolidating the data. If it's, for our case, we are just using this project that you've created for the training. So you have to also have that in mind. And then when you run that, I think you can be able to access the data from COBO.
Absolutely right. So we need to figure out exactly what our input is and then where we want that output to go. So we talked about some prerequisites being that you should have a COBO form already built and hopefully tested. And then you should also have a database instance. Now that database doesn't need to be configured. It doesn't need to have tables and columns and all that, but you need to have a database up and running. So there's lots of free and open source deployment options to get that up and running, or like WCS, you might have a team that can help you out with that. But as Jesse said, you know, we need to pick our form. So Jesse, this was your form, right? Fish landing?
Yeah, that's my form.
Okay. So where can I find that unique identifier?
The ABCF until K.
Yeah, that's right. Right at the URL. So that's the easiest way to grab that unique identifier of the form. If I also downloaded it, so if I go to form and if I wanted to download it to XLS just to check out what that looked like on the database side, once that file downloaded, it would also, the name of that file would have the same thing as the ID. And so by each of these forms having a unique identifier, it allows us to capture maybe multiple forms that might have the same name. Like you might have 20 Sharks and Rays forms that are all called Sharks and Rays. but you know that different users are collecting data into each of those forms. And then OpenFN knows exactly which of those 20 forms you want to sync by looking at that unique ID in that form ID. So great. So we have this unique identifier. We know what our form is called. We know this database that we're going to be pushing to. So in this instance, we're pushing to this demo Postgres database that we have set up for ConSoSci just for this training. So as we run these solutions, it'll go through that. And on the training, we talked about there are these different jobs. So there's these 4 jobs that are just in charge of that infrastructure setup. So taking these inputs and spitting out outputs. And does anyone remember what that A3 job spits up? It's called A3 create DB tables and columns. What exactly does that generate? Hint, it's in the name.
Database table.
I think it
with
generates.
columns.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, it does. And what if I don't want OpenFN to automatically manipulate my database? What are my options there? Anyone remember?
Not run it.
Not run it, but to still generate the SQL script. So remember, SQL is that language we can run in databases like Postgres to tell Postgres how to modify the database. So maybe we want to generate a script that prescribes how that database should be manipulated, but doesn't actually execute it. So that's absolutely right. And so just a reminder that if you wanted to turn on that setting, that's an A3. So like in this job that actually generates this database output, there are these different settings where you can specify that some of these options to write SQL and whether to execute can be turned on or off, true or false. So you'll see here we have both of these as true, because for what we've been doing, we're both writing the SQL as well as going ahead and just executing that configuration in the database. So if y'all remember last week, we pulled up the ConSoSci database and we kind of clicked through those tables and we watched how users auto-generated tables. So if we didn't want to auto manipulate the database, we just turn execute off to false. And we can still write the SQL. So that way our administrators can copy that, maybe make some edits and then run it whenever they're ready in the database. Anyone have any ideas of when that might be a good idea to not execute immediately, but rather to just write the SQL?
So I mean, if you have a form where you want some data to like reorganize into a specific table that is not created automatically in this script, then you can change that to reorganize your tables.
Absolutely. So if you want to expand kind of the destination system, so you want to add another table or maybe change a table slightly that it's mapping to, then that gives you this template that you can modify before then going and executing the SQL script generation. Another common use case I've seen already is with folks who OpenFN, you remember, will generate these tables and columns based off of what's in the form. So if you have a Sharks and Rays form, it's going to generate a script that's going to create a Sharks and Rays table. But let's say in your database, you don't call it Sharks and Rays, you just call it Sharks. In that case, what you might do is you could, upstream when you first ran the form, maybe change that table ID. So that way that table ID will output as Sharks. Or if you know that your table names are just very different throughout, you can generate the SQL script and then go in and modify the SQL script to then adjust the names exactly how you like it, and the metadata exactly how you like it. Now here's the question: if I generate the SQL script, and if I make changes to it, what happens to that OpenFN job?
it should remain off.
Yeah, say more. What does off mean?
That it won't run unless we change the blue switch. But it stay there, yes?
Yes, so the job will be off. But let's say I run job A3. So I'm going to go to activity history here. And let's say I run job A3, I get that SQL script, and then I want to go and turn on a job. So let's say the Sharks and Rays job to run and process my data. Anything that I need to change about the job if I change my script?
Well, I guess you want to copy paste the changes that you made from the script and re-put it in the job.
Exactly.
So that it's the same. Yeah.
Exactly. So the job tells OpenFN how to take data and map it to this database that you just created. So if you are changing the database that's outputted, so if you're going through and saying, oh, I actually want to call my tables totally different things, or I want to add another table in my destination system for the data to map to, then if I'm going through and manually making those changes in either my database or in that SQL script that I'm then going to execute, I then need to tell OpenFN that, hey, by the way, this destination database, it's shifted a little bit, something's changed. And so therefore we need to go through the OpenFN job and validate that these data elements that we're referencing in the table are still relevant. Like, are these table names still the same? Are these column names still the same, or have they changed at all in the destination database?
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we change this job after our script edit, and that we rerun the previous ones that created this, will it overwrite the changes that we made, or will it create a new, different job again?
Yeah, I guess what changes are you making in this job?
I don't know if we, I mean, if we change the title of the table, the name of the table, and that after doing that, the job, if I can remember the name, but the job that automatically creates this is being rerun with the same form. So then we'll have this job that is modified and the other automatically created one.
Good question. So if you decide to repeatedly run the automation solution for the same form, so let's say I have Sharks and Rays, I run it through the automation solution and it generates both a database and this job that I'm looking at right here, this auto job. Now, if Diana, as you suggest, let's say I go through and I change all the table names here in the job. Then if I turn on the job and start syncing the data, and I've also made sure that the table names match the destination database, the data is going to flow through great. And that's going to work just fine. But if I rerun the entire automation flow, let's say I added a question to my Kobo form, and I rerun the entire automation flow, what OpenFN is going to do is it's going to check for existing jobs with the same name. And if it finds this job, it will update it, so it will overwrite it based off the Kobo form definition. So if you had gone through and done some work and changing some of the table names that you don't want to be overwritten, what you might do is make a copy of this job with a different name to preserve this auto version 2 of this job. But if you still want to be catching changes made to the original form definition, then you might continue to run your form through that automated solution just to see what additional mappings are coming through. But as soon as you change your destination in any way, whether it's names or kind of configuration of tables, then the automation can no longer recognize what that destination database. It can only assume what that is based off the form definition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess it's better to try to run the automated flow just once per form, to not have, well, if we want to do some changes, just to not have overwriting jobs or duplicate or something like that.
Yeah, if you're using the automation solution as a template for your own, you know, configuration and your own custom integration, then that's kind of the mindset. It should be, this is a template that you're now customizing. So you're kind of going off that path, and we'll talk a little bit more about that this week. But if you are staying on the path, you're using the template, you're not making a lot of changes in the destination database, you're fine with open function of assuming what that database looks like based off of the form definition, then you can keep using this automated solution. But it's as soon as you start to deviate from that, then you're kind of on your own custom route.
And one last question after I stop. Is it right that for now the automated flow will create a different table for each repeat group and each select multiple questions?
Yes. So right now in its current state, it's for every repeat group. What we talked about with WCS is that additional changes for every select multiple. There's also going to be the many-to-many tables. So that's in development. So you won't see that this week, but that is going to be the expectation, next week onwards.
Okay, thanks.
And with that, there'll be some updated documentation on kind of the default database output. Cool. So I think for those of you who weren't tracking that whole conversation, it's like when do you start to customize these outputs generated by OpenFunction? As soon as you start to customize that, OpenFunction isn't that smart where it can suddenly predict what's going on in your database and all that. So as soon as you start to customize, then you're building your own integration, which is wonderful, and that's what we're going to start to talk a little bit about today. But if you're relying on this automation solution to tell you when a COBO form changes and how that change should influence the integration, that assumes that you're going to be using this integration solution or this automation solution repeatedly. So for those of you that are just hoping to use that as a template, then I think my recommendation is to make sure you get your COBO form right, make sure then to run the automation solution to generate that kind of baseline job and baseline database to work with. And then from there, you can choose your own adventure and customize and all that, but just note that then you're going the custom route and you're no longer leveraging what could be automatically produced, if that makes sense. Any other questions on that one? And maybe just for this WCS team here, I guess, are there certain scenarios where you definitely see kind of preserving this automated output versus kind of going your own custom route, or do you more so see this as a way to quickly kind of jumpstart the custom route?
That's a good question. Hopefully we will be able to use this route often. I think the reality is we're going to end up with custom tweaks in most cases. I think the question will be, can we keep those custom tweaks fairly limited?
Got it. So hoping to then leverage the templates, but mapping ultimately to a data structure that works well for whatever analysis y'all are doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be, like, one thing that's core across a lot of our work is taxa tables, and we're always going to try to map to a standard taxa table rather than to a custom one for each project, for example. So there are just certain things which we're always going to end up having to tweak it towards.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I think that's just something for other organizations to be thinking about too, is, do you use this automation solution as is? Do you have these database tables that you're trying to map to? Or do you go somewhere in between where you start off with the automation solution, use it as a template, and then customize? So in these trainings, we're going to be also talking about how do you custom build an integration from scratch. So if you don't want to use the automation solution as a template, then you can also just learn how to do it from scratch and then evaluate, what's more time and effective to start with this as a template or to go your own route entirely. So that's what we'll talk a little bit more starting today and most certainly on Wednesday. Any other questions or comments just kind of on automation flow use cases? Because then I think I'd like to maybe turn to Remy and see if we can get his form up and running on the solution. Cool. Well, Remy, would you mind maybe walking us through how we can get your form running through this automated solution? I see you made this clone of Sharks and Rays form. Is this yours?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what job do we go to kick off the solution?
The first one, A1.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we can see here, these are the different inputs we need. We need that form UID. Do you remember what P1, P2, and table ID are?
So P1 is the institution, and P2 is like what function the form has. Like that is test, and then the table ID is the ID you use for basically what you use for the table, the title.
Exactly. So these P1, P2, that's prefix 1, prefix 2, are just to provide some namespacing to tables, and then the table ID is what you actually want to call this destination table. So I just dropped it in the chat. Remy, do you want to maybe kind of chat back to me what your form specific setup should look like?
Oh, okay, just a few.
Yeah, so going through, grabbing that ID to get that form UID, and then thinking about what your two prefixes should look like, and maybe what this destination table should look like. And Jesse, you were able to get your fish landing working okay? Any questions from last time?
No, I think it's working well. It worked well.
Okay. And Jesse, while I have you, what are some of the things in the Kobo form names that we should be thinking about? Is there anything that we should be worried about?
Yeah, I think what more or less what Dan just was asking about, because last time I remember we were trying to transfer or enter the form, Kobo form to OpenFN, but the issue that we had was one of the, I think that names from the tables was different from what I had created in the OpenFN. So I think that's something that someone has to be cautious about.
Yeah, I think it was that trigger on the job. So we can take a look at that again as we run through Remy's form. Jesse, what about before we even run the form through the solution? Like at this stage, what are some things Remy should be checking for just to make sure that this is going to work for his form?
I think once he has once you've created the form, you have to deploy the form, and then once you've created the form in Kobo, it should be deployed, which I think he has done that already. And then now that is when he's going to pick the unique identifier of the form and transfer those information or details to the jobs where he's going to create that to the jobs that he's going to create.
Absolutely. That's spot on. So making sure that form is deployed, and then we can grab that form ID. Just a reminder that we also want to look out for special characters. So if there's any weird periods or dashes or a form that started with a number, we want to avoid that just because of Postgres rules around metadata and table naming. So we want to make sure that it starts with an alpha character, not a number. Accents are okay, but any other weird backslashes, period, things like that we want to remove. Another thing, just as Jesse flagged, make sure the form is deployed. Another thing that we just talked about with Remy at the start is making sure your form permissions are set up right. So you want to make sure that when you share a form, let me go back, that your permissions are set up to view that form and view those submissions there. And then once all that's ready to go, then you can run the form through the solution and ensure that it's going to go correctly. So Remy, I see you chatted. So I'm going to flip back open to job 1. And
I'll just hold on. I've seen a suggestion, a proposal that I think of. Yeah, so there's a proposal from Diane to have a slight change, which I've just incorporated in the table ID.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And Diane, why can you explain why this change? Why map to sharks and rays and not sharks and rays Kenya?
Yeah, so it was just, I mean, when we think about all the Sharks and Rays program is in like 4 different countries, and so each country have their own form, but the country is in the data that they collect. Like the first question is the country. So I think from a analysis perspective, it's easier to have all the data from all the different countries in one table, and that we can use the filters on that table to do some analysis. That's why I was suggesting this.
Gotcha. So rather than like a table for every country, let's get it all into to one place, and then rather on the row level, maybe capture where that data comes from.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which is captured already, actually.
Gotcha. So Remy, how does this look?
It looks okay.
Okay. So it's going to map to this WCS task sharks and rays table.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. And what now? How do we kick this thing off?
There's a blue like play icon.
Yeah, exactly. So I can go ahead and click run. And then where do I go to see if things happen?
You go to inbox or activity history. I'm not sure. If you're in inbox, just check the inbox.
Yeah, so inbox is for data. Remember, data is getting sent to OpenFN, but right now we're focusing just on this infrastructure setup. So where do you think we should? Maybe somewhere else?
Okay, activity history.
Yeah, and so this is like anytime OpenFN does something, there's that history of it. So just today, I see that this first job ran, and it looks like, okay, great. It successfully pulled some data from that form. That's your form, right?
Yes.
Cool. And then if I flip to the next run, it looks like the second job that analyzes everything succeeded. If I flip to this third one, A3,
yeah,
what do we see here?
A3 is where it's creating the table.
Exactly. It's generating that database output. So let's actually go look at the database and just make sure it worked. So can you all see my dbeaver screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I have this ConSoSci database open here. And if I click into the database, I can see all the different tables going on. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I expect to see, there we go, this WCS text sharks and rays table going on.
Okay.
And that looks familiar.
Yeah, I'm happy. It's great. Thanks.
Awesome. Cool. So we have this database output. So that's A3. And because we have that execute to turn on, it automatically did it in the database. But if we had that off, we can take that SQL and run it separately. Then job A4. What do we see here, Remy?
So this it's creating a job to write the survey data.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we go find that job?
How go to the jobs
and what should I look for?
A4.
What's that?
A4. Is
A4.
it the same? Yeah.
So that's what we were just looking at. was this
So
is
it was
A4.
Oh, okay.
So now it's telling us it created a new job. So we need to go
Okay.
find this one. So it's a little bit meta what's going on here. There's a job creating a job. And so this is where it's a little bit
Okay.
confusing. But this one job, this is the output, the run. It's saying,
So-
hey, this created another job.
Okay, I'm following. So that auto, you're supposed to search for auto stroke WCS.
Mhm.
Does it bring, yes, the next job that was created?
Yeah, so that job tells us exactly the name of the job that's created. So this auto WCS. So then what we can do is we can go search for that. We can either just copy and paste, or we can type it in here. Where is it?
Yeah, that's where I remember. Okay.
Huh. Rita, do you know if Mamadou was maybe switching up the destination of this while he was testing?
I don't know about checking.
Okay. So Remy, did you get this far last time?
Yeah, that's where I got to, and I was like,
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I know our teammate was doing some testing just based off the feedback last time. So just
Okay.
want to check with him. But you're absolutely right. You should be searching here, and the
Yeah,
job
I
should
was
be
like,
here.
what's going on? Yeah.
No, cool. So we'll check that out. But then those jobs will look just like any of these, where then you can see, hey, here's how we're mapping to this different database outputs. And yeah, what's the next step to get this going, to actually use this job? Do you remember by chance?
The next step, that is now when you have the fifth job, or
Yeah, we have the fifth job. So we have this job to map data. We have this database. So we have this job. We have the database output that we saw here. How do we actually turn this on to process data?
so the various things you need to include. I can't quite remember.
Charlotte, any guesses?
Nope, sorry.
Jesse?
I think you just scroll down to SQL script. So you copy you have to paste the information to upset, and this code that starts with upset, let's say row 29 to row 35, that is where you need to also have the right information for those sections also.
Right. So if we changed our database, we just want to make sure that this is aligned with whatever our database looks like. So let's say Jesse, that we know the database is we auto generated the database output, and now we've auto created this job to map data to that database. So now we have both the database and we have this job that we're looking at right now to map data. How do we actually start integrating data? Anyone?
We switch on the job.
Yeah, so what we've done at this stage is we've just created the infrastructure for the integration. We created the output and we created this is the integration script, this job. And so what we need to do is we need to turn it on so it can catch data as it comes in. And then we need to tell OpenFN, what database we want to put this data. So we might want to edit the job and then update the credential here. And then this would tell us, tell OpenFN that, hey, this job is on. It's listening for data coming in. And as soon as it comes to OpenFN, go ahead and use this job and map it to the database. And if you all see, you see how I click edit next to this job? there's something called the trigger here. I'm gonna exit out of full screen to see this. Does anyone remember what an open function trigger is?
It's when the job runs on its own to trigger the job to run.
Yeah, exactly. It's that thing that activates the job. So what are some example triggers? I have some out here up on my screen.
I don't see them on your screen, but a specific like time of day, for example.
Yes, we can schedule jobs, and so every day, every morning at 10 a.m., every Monday, we can schedule a job to run, and that could be one trigger. What about for more real-time instant action? What type of triggers can we use?
You can say run it when you have a submission from this other job, from when you have a message from this other job.
Exactly. So triggers are kind of like, have you all ever used Gmail rules or filters? So if you get an email from Diane, automatically mark it as important. If you get an email from Alexa with the subject help, automatically move to the trash can. So depending on the content of that data, you can set up these different triggers to run. So here we have a couple different trigger examples. I'm in this trigger section, where if we have data coming in where the form name matches sharks and rays, we might then want to activate a certain job. Or if we have data coming in where the table ID has been specified that it should map to a very specific destination, such as catch, maybe we want to route the data there. And so something that I just want to flag to you all is that when you auto-generate these jobs, so Jesse, I'm going to look at your job that you auto-generated last week. I can see here that there is this trigger, see this little lightning bolt, table ID catch. And Jesse, do you remember, is that the name of your table in your system?
Yeah, that's the name.
Okay, so that is the name of the table. Okay, so then what we'll want to do is when we go and sync data, we want to make sure that any data that flows through OpenFunction has the same tag that matches this trigger. So we want to make sure that any data coming in also has the table ID catch. So that way OpenFunction, as soon as it receives that data, will be like, oh, here's a catch submission. Let me go ahead and let me forward it onwards to the database. So when we're ready to sync data and to specify that tag or that trigger, do you all remember which job we use to sync data?
No.
No. Okay. What words might we use to get data, to extract data? There's all these fetch, exactly. So there's a couple different ones going on. So this is where, checking out what's already available in your OpenFunction project or what's already available on the GitHub repo to use. But you want to use one of these jobs that are fetching data. So they're going to Kobo, they're asking the Kobo API for data, and then they're going to be pulling that through. So we have these two fetch job options. We have some that run only after a specific date and are incrementally updating that date. So if I run this job today, the next time I run it tomorrow, don't give me all submissions, just only give me new submissions since yesterday or the last time this job ran. And then the next day. And so that way you're just incrementally pulling only new or updated submissions. Or you might have this job that doesn't have any type of date filter, and you just want to pull all submissions ever submitted for a specific job. So does anyone have an idea of why you would use maybe the historical fetch versus this incremental fetch?
maybe to avoid duplicate of data. It's just an update.
Yeah, maybe just to, exactly. So just to avoid, bringing in the same submissions multiple times. Luckily with open function jobs, what we're doing is we're using an upsert pattern. So that pattern that's always checking if a record exists and then updating and deleting. So we're not risking duplicating data, but we are making open function do twice the work. It's redundant to maybe ask for the same submissions again and again if they haven't changed at all. What's an example or reason for why we would want to pull all submissions? Why would we want to pull that full historical data set? What's the use case there?
So we've had to use this many times for all the data that were collected before we started working with you with OpenFN. We had tons of data collected in Kobo that we wanted to send to the database, and so we had to use this historical job. And or when we edit data way after the data collection is finished, for example, if I'm adding a field on a form that was missing, and then I want to rerun all the old data so that it goes to the database, so then I would use the historical form, the historical job.
Gotcha. So like doing this entire data refresh. And so therefore, forget what I had in the database. I do want to sync everything again. Also, maybe you started data collection a while ago and you want to pull in that full batch.
Yeah, we also had cases where, we linked, we add the form a bit too late, the ongoing form a bit too late in the ongoing job. And so we have data that was collected already 6 months ago that we want to fetch using the historical form. And we have data still being collected. So we want to put the form on both jobs, historical for what was collected 6 months ago and the ongoing for what is being collected now.
Gotcha. So the first time you're setting up that form, doing that historical extract to get everything out, and then from that day onwards, just checking for new or updated submissions. Cool.
And so I have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
No. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Charlotte, first.
Sorry, we have like 1 second delay that messes it up. I was gonna ask Alexa, is there like how far back maximum would the A5, the classic fetch job, pull data from?
Good question. So that's up to you to define. So for this one, if you check this out, there's this starting date, this cursor. So remember, cursor meaning like the bookmark. So that tells open function where to leave off. So you can adjust this of let's saying, starting, maybe let's say you were collecting test submissions for the first month of that form, but then after May 1st onwards, it was definitely real data. Then you might choose to put in that starter cursor of saying, after May 1st or May 25th, let me go ahead and pull data. But if you know that there isn't that starting date, and you want to do all time, then that's where that other job doesn't have that date cursor. So it just kind of takes all submissions all time. But what this does, it says, great, starting from this point, go fetch all data, and then incrementally every time it runs, it's going to only check for new submissions.
Thanks.
Any other questions here?
No, I've put it in the chat, but was just going to add that, for example, for this Sharks and Rays program, Tanzania already collected with their data collection, but we haven't set up these jobs in the final jobs and tables yet. So once we have this set up, we'll have to run this historical job to get all the data that has been collected already.
Gotcha. And so then, yeah, just thinking through, hey, we'll probably do this historical pool, or maybe just go ahead and start setting this up before you start data collection just to get the data flowing into OpenFN there. Awesome. So we talked about a little bit of the differences between the two. So again, if we're just incrementally fetching, so if you're setting up this solution to run on a regular basis, so if you're expecting to be collecting data from here on out, I recommend, considering this incremental job where you're like, okay, from today onwards, I want to be checking for new or updated submissions and just setting up that first one to do that incremental check. And then separately, if you know that, okay, I'm going to have to, I know there's some historical data that I need to pull in, then you can on a more once-off or on-demand basis, rather run this historical extract and get everything. So it sounds like what we did with WCS and the BNS migration, there was data back to 2017. We first ran this historical jobs, got all the data from 2017 until today's date, and then switched on these other jobs to just start checking for new submissions since then. But in the event that we ever wanted to do a total refresh of the data, we can always rerun that full pool. But at the end of the day, these are just GET requests to the Kobo API. And really the only main difference is just, are we filtering by some sort of date parameter or are we not? So if you inspect the two jobs, they look very similar. Just the slight difference is the date filtering that we're adding on. So just be aware that they're both doing the same thing effectively behind the scenes. It's just a different query that we're sending to Kobo. Cool. Then the other thing to flag, and Jesse, I think this is where you got a little bit tripped up last week, is when we go and we pull this different form data, we're again specifying the ID, we're specifying the form type, we're specifying the form name, owner. And again, this is where if we're using the automation solution, we want to specify this table ID, because this tells OpenFN where to map this data to. So Jesse, I see yours here. We have this fish landing form down here. And it looks like we are mapping to this table ID catch. So we want to make sure that any data coming from this form goes to this table ID catch. So when we run this job, it's going to get data. It's going to send it to our OpenFN inbox. So let me see if I can find some of Jesse's data. And yep, looks like here's some of Jesse's data here. I can click in, I can see, great, here's the JSON version of the Kobo form submissions that are now being pulled into OpenFN through those fetch jobs. And you see here in this message body, I have this table ID tag. And so we're like inserting this tag into the Kobo submission itself. So that way, when OpenFN sees this data coming in, it quickly scans it. It sees, oh, table ID catch. And then in this current potential section, we can see that this criteria flagged that this job should run. And so by having this there, it automatically triggered this job. And we can see that run history here for this individual message. So for your triggers, they don't have to be table IDs. You can set up job triggers to be really anything in your form. So for example, if you wanted to map all responses from Jesse to one table, your trigger can rather be when the respondent is Jesse rather than if table ID is catch. And that could also be a way of grouping data. You might say that for example, whenever data is submitted to a certain site, you want to route it to a certain destination or send some sort of notification, that can be a trigger. If you want, any form name or any form knower to set off some sort of automation, that can also be a trigger. There are also some instances where we're using form type as a trigger rather than form name. Diane, Charlotte, do you remember that discussion of all, like why would we map using form type or maybe table ID rather than form name as the trigger?
I remember what was the conclusion. But I think,
Is it
oh, no, yeah, go ahead, Charlotte.
No, vas-y. You got it.
Yeah, I remember now. So it's because we have all these forms that are used in these standard forms being used in different countries, and so the form name will be different for each country, but the form type will remain the same everywhere.
Exactly. And so like triggers, think of it again like these email filter rules you're configuring. You want to try to pick out a universal criteria. So something that's going to apply to all forms. So if you know that you can specify all forms map to the same table, or if they're all the same form type, then using those as triggers is usually a good idea, because then it says any data that comes in matching this, it will route to one place. But you know, if you're thinking about triggers that are filtering by submission time, that's probably not a good idea unless you want unless every form is expected to have exactly the same submission date and time. But that's unlikely because forms are not going to be all submitted at the same exact time. So submission time is probably not a good trigger. So just for triggers, the thing is to think about like what's that kind of more universal criteria that you can use to then say, oh, this data belongs to this job, and then therefore activate that whole workflow route. Any other quick questions on triggers? We're gonna come back and we're gonna play around with this a little bit.
Another question, but what's interesting is that we have this standardization effort across our forms and our question, and there's also an effort to make on this form types, just to make sure that if someone is using BNS in Asia and someone is using BNS in Latin America, if they use two different form types, it might mess up the database. So good to think about the form types and make sure that everyone is aware of what's being used in the world.
Yeah, or as an administrator, being really mindful of when you're pulling data, exactly how do you want to tag this data? Because that can ultimately decide how this data is routed between these different jobs. So if you have multiple forms going to the same destination, just being really intentional at making sure that they all have the same table ID when you're pulling that data, and that way you can also control how the data is routed. Okay. Cool. Well, that was a bit of the automation solution. So we're going to come back to customizing it, but if you all haven't, Remy will check out that one issue that's going on. I'm not sure. I think it's something with our credentials are not right, and not sending your auto job to this output. So we'll check in with our teammate there. But otherwise, I think would love for you all to just kind of keep playing with the solution if you want to check things out and bring more questions to us. Diane, we're playing around with this one just to see what's going on with those permissions in there. So we'll get back to you on that. But this kind of concludes the automation setup. So if you do have any questions, let me know, and we can kind of walk through that during the break. But we're going to pause right here and take a quick break. I need to go fill up my water. And then we're going to come back and we're going to start to talk about custom integrations and just other parts in the process. So let's meet back here in 5 minutes. Does that work?